My name is Scott Blair, and I'm from Ocean Grove, New Jersey. When you apply to law school nowadays, you can actually mark on your application if you're openly gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. And, I put that down because I figured, why not? I was. And, I did pretty well on the LSAT, and so this information goes out to a bunch of law schools. And so Harvard's gay law student group called my mother's house, because that was my address, and said, we want to talk to Scott Blair. And she said, why? Well, because he's gay, we know he's applying to law school, we really like him to go to Harvard. And so we're in the car at one point, and she says, Scott, I got this call from Harvard Law's gay student group saying you were gay. I'm like, that's weird, why? Well, they want you to go there. I'm like, oh. Did you say their contact information? No. Oh, how come? And she's like, well, I was hoping you were lying to them in order to get into a better law school. I'm like, well, I probably would do that if I was straight, but actually I am gay. And then she replies, all right, I almost want to drive this car into a tree. And I reply, can you let me get out of the car first and then go ahead? It was very weird because I still maintain that is the best possible way for any mother to ever find out that their child is gay. And even though my father is an atheist and my mother is a nominal Catholic, they joined an Orthodox Jewish ex-gay group as well as Parents and Friends of Ex-Gays, which is an ex-gay movement surprisingly active in New Jersey. And I looked at them and I said, that is the opposite of the group you are supposed to be joining right now. They literally stole the name of the group Parents and Friends of Lesbian and Gays. That is the group you should be joining. And they asked me to meet with somebody in this group, one of its leaders, to sort of understand what the homosexual lifestyle was about and what being gay was about. And I thought they were crazy, I still think they're crazy for thinking that. But to humor them, I said I would go if they tried to be a little more open-minded. So I met this guy at my father's office in the summer of my second year of law school. And he comes in and he first sits down and he asks me, so why are you gay? I'm like, well, I'm attracted to men. And he's like, why are you attracted to men? And I'm like, well, probably pretty complicated, maybe some hereditary thing, maybe upbringing, sexuality is very complicated. And he sort of goes into this weird diatribe about how no one has ever found a gay gene. And I'm looking at him and he tells me, every study that's reported to find a gay gene has been authored by gays. No one else has ever found one. And I said, I have no idea what studies you're talking about, but sexuality is very complex. Everything that humans do is very complex. All a gene does is control the expression of a protein. I would be extremely shocked if one gene can control anything like that. And he looked at me and he's like very confused because I don't think anyone had ever answered him in that manner before. And so we continue sort of talking and he asked me about my childhood. And he says, well, I know your parents are divorced. How did that affect you? And I said, look, lots of people are divorced, It wasn't great, but I'm doing fine now. And he asked me if I hate my father for that, for the fact that my parents are divorced. And I said, no, not really. I was raised by my father after the divorce. And then he asked me, okay, how do you feel about your mother? I'm like, why do you ask? Well, a lot of times people who, people who are angry at their mother and at being turned off of women. And I look at him and I say, okay, so if I was angry at my mother, that would make me gay because I would be turned off of women. But you asked me how I felt about my father. My guess is what you're going to say is that if I was angry at my father, that made me want to seek the company of other men. And the guy looks at me and says, that is often borne out by my experience. And I was sort of blinked for a moment and I said, isn't that sort of contradictory? No matter which one of my parents I hate, which I don't, if they ever watch this, that made me gay. And he said, well, it's very complicated, but basically it's often something the parents have done. We tried to talk about how sexual immorality can lead to the fall of civilizations. And he brought up the Roman Empire. And I got very angry about this because, half the books on my bookshelf are about the Roman Empire. And the point that I made to him was the Roman Empire only fell after it became Christian. And he said, well, they weren't really Christian in any sense of the word that we would use today. And I pointed out to him that St. Augustine was one of the most famous Christian theologians ever. And according to what this guy was telling me, he wasn't actually a Christian. And I wanted to know what made him say that was the case. And then he said, well, they were very, very Catholic. And then I said, you realize my mother is Catholic, right? And he sort of moved and changed the conversation a little bit. One thing that he tried to do was say that gays were trying to restrict the rights of religious people by trying to make it illegal to fire gays and lesbians. And I told him this is basically the same thing as saying African Americans were trying to restrict the rights of KKK members during the civil rights movement. I didn't see any difference, and I still don't see a difference. And I was sort of like, but you know, I mean, if we're sort of at this point in the conversation, I don't know what we're really talking about. All you've been really doing, as far as I can tell, is getting everything wrong. If you want a reading list, I'm happy to give you one. And then he was like, well, thank you for your time. And then he walked out to go talk to my father for a little bit. It's actually hard not to feel a little sorry for him, because he was gay, or you know, before he changed. And he changed he claims that he realized homosexuality was immoral in the 80s when he saw a lot of his friends dying from AIDS. And you kind of want to mock, and it's like hard to mock somebody for that, right? Because I do think that affected him. I don't think it affected him in a healthy manner. I think there are a lot of people who had a better, more productive outcome, but you know, it's easy to see how that would affect somebody. You know, my parents continued to be in this group for a little while longer after this happened. When he left, he told my father that I'm very much like him, which did make my father laugh a little bit. Because it's certainly true. We both have a very strong argumentative and stubborn streak. The relationship with my father now is interesting because we are very similar in a lot of ways. You know, we don't talk about my sexual life at all, or my relationships at all. Which is a shame. The last time we talked about it, I basically told him I'm not changing who I am, he can deal with it, or become a smaller part of my life. So we're seeing how that plays out. I would tell any kid who has to go to see an ex-gay therapist, or somebody who's telling them that it's wrong to be gay, that they are smarter than somebody who thinks that, and they're better than somebody who thinks that. And frankly, any argument that somebody uses to support changing who you are and being straight is very, very bad and very dumb, you know? And 30 seconds of thought will show you why it's wrong.